The land had always been hard, but that year it felt like the earth itself had turned its back on Alina. The drought had come early, stealing the spring rains and leaving the ground cracked like old pottery. Alina had watched helplessly as her tiny vegetable patch withered. The corn stalks turned brittle, and the last of her chickens died one by one. Every morning, she prayed the sky would break open and send water. But the heavens stayed dry and merciless. Alina had been widowed for nearly a year. Her husband, Tomas, had been a fair worker but unlucky, and the accident that took his life had taken the family's security with it. She tried to keep the children fed on what little she had left: dried beans, a few potatoes, and whatever wild plants she could forage. But as the summer dragged on, even the wild plants grew scarce. Her eldest, Mateo, only 9, had stopped asking for seconds. Her little girls, Rosa and Alma, cried at night from hunger, their small bellies tight against their ribs. What little money she had saved had gone to pay off part of a debt Tomas left behind. The rest she hid away for emergencies, but the emergencies kept coming. First, the stove broke. Then Alma grew sick. Then rats got into their grain. Alina had fought every day to keep her family safe, but she was losing the battle. No matter how hard she worked, her children grew thinner, quieter, and more tired. Neighbors had problems of their own. No one had enough water. No one had enough food. And no one had enough kindness left to share more than a few loaves of bread or a handful of flour. Alina didn't blame them. Hard times made hard people. But that didn't ease her children's suffering. The moment that broke her came one afternoon, when she found Alma, barely 5 years old, sitting by the woodpile, trying to eat a handful of dirt. Alina ran to her, scooping her up and brushing the soil from her tiny mouth. The child was crying not because of the dirt, but because she was starving. Alina held her to her chest, rocking her, whispering words of comfort she no longer believed. That night, Alina couldn't sleep. She sat by the dying fire, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the walls. She looked at her children huddled together under a threadbare quilt and felt something inside her collapse. If she did nothing, they would die. Slowly, painfully, quietly, and she would have to watch every moment of it. The thought crushed her. She knew the largest ranch in the region. Ward Ranch belonged to Caleb Ward. He was wealthy, stern, and intimidating, but she'd heard whispers that he was fair. Some said he kept to himself because of a tragedy years before. Others said he was mean as the devil. Alina didn't know what to believe. All she knew was that he had food, he had water, and he might help her children survive. At dawn, she wrapped her daughters in blankets and told Mateo to pack anything that might be useful. There wasn't much to bring: some clothes, the last pieces of dried bread, and a small wooden cross Tomas had carved. Alina tied her hair back, put on her faded dress, and took a deep breath that felt like swallowing thorns. Then she stepped onto the dusty road with her children, beginning the long walk to Caleb's ranch. She didn't know what she would say yet. She only knew that she would beg, kneel, or bargain, do anything if it meant saving the 3 small lives walking beside her. That was the moment she realized she no longer had pride, only fear, only hope, only love strong enough to break her heart. This was her breaking point, and her last chance. Caleb Ward's name carried weight across the whole county, though he never asked for such attention. People spoke of him in lowered voices, as if afraid he might appear behind them, tall, silent, and cold as the northern wind. To some, he was a legend. To others, a warning. But to everyone, he was the man who owned more land than anyone else for miles. Ward Ranch stretched farther than the eye could see. Rolling fields of grazing cattle, sturdy barns, windmills creaking against the sky, and a large ranch house built from dark timber. Ranch hands whispered that Caleb never wasted words, never smiled, and never let anyone close enough to know what he truly felt. They said he rode alone at dawn and worked harder than any hired man, as if he were punishing himself for something unseen. Caleb had inherited the ranch young, and had turned it into the powerhouse. It was efficient, profitable, and respected. But wealth didn't make him generous. It made people cautious around him. Folks preferred to stay on his good side, and that meant respecting his space. He didn't attend town gatherings or church socials. He avoided unnecessary conversation. He ran his ranch with the precision of a soldier and expected loyalty in return. Yet beneath the whispers of his strictness lay another story, one spoken only quietly, with a certain sadness. Years ago, Caleb had been married. His wife Lily had been gentle-hearted and bright, the opposite of his somber nature. Town ladies remembered the way she used to slip her hand into his, softening his stiff posture, bringing light to his shadowed gaze. Their happiness had been brief. Lily died during childbirth, and their newborn son lived only hours. After the double burial, something inside Caleb shut down. He withdrew from everyone, even his closest friends. The man who once smiled at his wife's laughter became the man who barely spoke at all. Instead of healing, he buried himself in work-long days, endless chores, anything that kept him from remembering the sound of Lily's voice. Some folks judged him for turning cold. Others understood that grief changed people, but no one dared to approach his loneliness, because Caleb made it clear he didn't want company, didn't want pity, didn't want to be reminded that he had once been a husband and father and had lost everything. Still, despite his distance, there were signs of the man he used to be. Caleb always paid his workers fairly. He never turned away an injured animal. He fired hands for cruelty, but forgave honest mistakes. He donated anonymously to the town orphanage, though no one ever mentioned that part aloud. People said he had a heart, he simply kept it locked away, where no one could touch it. It was into this world of silence and guarded grief that Elena stumbled, thin as a shadow, her children clinging to her torn skirts. When Caleb first saw the small group approaching the ranch from his porch, he felt an unexpected pull of concern. He didn't recognize them, but he recognized desperation. He had seen it once in his own reflection, after Lily passed. From a distance, he watched the widow struggle to remain upright, her legs trembling. Even before she reached him, Caleb could tell she had pushed herself beyond her limit. Something in him tightened, something he tried not to feel anymore. His ranch hands paused their work, exchanging uneasy looks. Women rarely came toward ranch, and none had ever approached looking so close to collapse. But Caleb didn't call out. He waited, stern-faced, arms crossed, every line of his posture carved in stone, because though the world thought him cold, another truth lingered quietly inside him. Caleb Ward never ignored a soul who truly needed help, and Alina, whether she realized it or not, was about to change everything he thought he had buried. By the time Alina reached the wide, open yard of Ward Ranch, her vision blurred at the edges. The sun beat down on her shoulders, turning her worn dress dark with sweat. Her children walked close to her sides, each step slower than the last. Mateo kept glancing at his mother, sensing her weakening even if he didn't understand the depth of her desperation. The girls were too exhausted to cry. Caleb Ward had come to the porch because one of his ranch hands called out, "Boss, someone's coming up the road." Normally, strangers approaching the ranch didn't concern him, but something in the man's voice made him step outside. When he saw Elena, thin, fragile, sunburned, barely holding herself upright, something tightened in his chest. She looked like she had been carved from sorrow and dust. Her children, small and hungry-eyed, clutched her skirts like frightened chicks. Elena's legs gave a small shake, and for a moment, Caleb thought she might fall. He took a step forward before stopping himself. He didn't rush to anyone. He didn't want to frighten her, but she steadied herself, pressing a hand to her chest, as though to keep her heart from breaking apart. When she finally reached him, her breath wheezed shallowly. She tried to speak, but only a cracked whisper came. Caleb nodded to one of the ranch hands, who hurried to bring her water. Alina reached for the cup with shaking fingers, took a small sip, then dropped to her knees before Caleb could stop her. The gesture startled him more than anything had in years. "Ma'am, there's no need," he began, but she shook her head fiercely, tears pooling in her eyes. "Please," she rasped. "Please, listen." Her children, terrified by their mother kneeling in the dirt, huddled around her. The sight of their scared little faces did something to Caleb, something uncomfortable. Something human. Alina lifted her face, streaked with dust and sweat. The humiliation of kneeling cut her deeply, but pride was a luxury she had buried long ago. "My children," she whispered, voice cracking like dry earth. "They're starving." Caleb's jaw tightened. He had seen hunger before, but never a mother begging for her children with such raw, trembling fear. "I can't feed them anymore," she confessed, choking on the words. "I have nothing left. No food, no money, no one to help." Her youngest, Alma, leaned against her, too tired to stand fully. Rosa clung to her sleeve, while Mateo stared up at Caleb with wide, desperate eyes. As if silently pleading on his mother's behalf, Alina squeezed her eyes shut, then said the thing she had carried like a stone in her chest for days. "Take them." Her voice broke, shattering into a sob. "Please, take my children." The ranch yard fell silent. Even the horses stopped shifting in their stalls. Elena's tears dripped into the dirt as she continued. "Let them work. Feed them. Keep them alive. I will go. Just don't let them die." Caleb couldn't breathe for a moment. He had heard many things in his lifetime: lies, threats, confessions, but never a plea so honest, so devastating. A mother offering up her own heart because she believed she had no other choice. Caleb stepped closer, his shadow falling over her and the children. He saw the truth in her face, the exhaustion, the sacrifice, the absolute terror of losing the only precious things she had left. "No," he said quietly. Alina sobbed harder, misinterpreting the word, thinking it meant refusal. But Caleb wasn't finished. "You're asking me to take your children," he said slowly, his voice low and steady. "But I won't separate a mother from her young." She looked up, startled, confused. Caleb's next words would change both of their lives forever. "I'll take the children, but only if you stay too." For a long stretched-in moment, Alina could not comprehend what Caleb had said. Her mind, exhausted from hunger and fear, caught only the first part, "I'll take the children." But the next words, "only if you stay too," hung in the air like something impossible, something she didn't dare believe she'd heard correctly. She blinked up at him, stunned. Her lips trembled. "I don't understand." Caleb sighed softly through his nose, not with annoyance, but with the weight of a man who had to make himself clearer. He crouched down, lowering himself so he no longer towered over her. His eyes, usually cold, unreadable, held something gentler now, something she didn't recognize. "You came here thinking you'd lose them," he said, voice calm but steady, thinking that giving them up was the only way to save them. Alina swallowed hard, still kneeling, still shaking. "It is. They need food, water." "I can't give you can," he interrupted, with a firmness that startled her. "You just can't do it alone." His words struck her chest like a sudden gust of wind, sharp, shaking, almost painful. She stared at him as if he were speaking a language she'd forgotten. Caleb didn't reach for her, didn't touch her. He simply rested his elbows on his knees and met her gaze. Directly, something he almost never did with anyone. "If I take your children in and send you away," he said, "they'd lose the one thing keeping them alive, their mother." Elena's breath caught. Tears blurred her vision again. "You don't understand," she whispered brokenly. "I have nothing to give this ranch. I'm not strong enough to work the fields. I don't know cattle. I can barely lift my own daughters now. I'm weak." Caleb shook his head once, sharply. "You're starving. That's different from weak." The simplicity of the truth stung, but it also warmed something inside her that had long grown cold. He continued, voice quieter now, almost reluctant, as though he wasn't used to explaining himself. "I won't tear a family apart. Not yours. Not anyone's. You stay, they stay. You go, they go. That's the only way I'm agreeing to take you in." Alina stared at him, stunned by the unexpected fairness, the unexpected kindness. She had come ready to beg, ready to sacrifice herself. She had never imagined a man, let alone a powerful ranch owner, would insist she keep her children with her. But why? She whispered. Caleb looked past her then, toward the dry fields, as if seeing something far away or something long ago. His jaw tightened slightly. "Because I've lived through losing a family," he said, "and I wouldn't wish it on anyone." Alina didn't know what pain he carried, but the heaviness in his voice told her enough. Before she could speak again, Caleb stood. His decision was final. He called out to his ranch hands, "Get these children something to eat, and bring a cot to the east cabin. Make sure there's clean water." The cowboys scrambled with unusual urgency. Some had seen starving travelers before, but none had witnessed a mother offer her children away. None had ever seen Caleb Ward kneel beside anyone either. Alina tried to get to her feet, but her legs buckled. Caleb reached out instinctively and stopped himself right before touching her. Instead, he offered his arm stiffly, giving her support without assuming closeness. She took it, too weak to protest. "Why are you helping us?" she asked softly as he guided her toward the cabin. Caleb looked down at her, a shadow passing behind his eyes. "Because you asked," he said simply, "and because you learned what most folks never do, that pride won't save the people you love." Alina lowered her gaze, shame and relief mixing painfully in her chest. For the first time in months, her children's footsteps were not the uncertain shuffle of hungry little bodies but hurried, excited taps as they followed the cowboys toward food. As they reached the cabin door, Caleb paused. "You and your family stay here," he said. "It's not charity. You'll cook for the ranch hands once you're strong enough. That's the arrangement." Alina nodded slowly, overwhelmed. It wasn't pity. It wasn't ownership. It was dignity. Something she thought she had lost forever. And with that single decision, Caleb Ward began changing the shape of all their lives. Alina spent her first night at Ward Ranch in a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. The small east cabin was simple but solid, a roof that didn't leak, a bed stuffed with clean straw, and a little table by the window. To her, it felt like luxury. Her children fell asleep almost instantly, bellies full for the first time in weeks. But Alina lay awake long after the stars rose, her thoughts circling like restless birds. Why had Caleb Ward, wealthy, distant, feared, helped her? People with power didn't give without expecting something in return. She had lived long enough to learn that hard truth. Men had looked at her before with hunger she recognized instantly, not for kindness, but for control. She had fled one such man after Tomas died, a predator hiding behind the mask of generosity. She'd learned to fear offers that seemed a good. So as gratitude warmed one side of her heart, suspicion chilled the other. What if Caleb expected payment she couldn't give? What if he thought helping her entitled him to something more? What if she had brought her children out of one danger, only to step into another? As those thoughts tormented her, she remembered how Caleb had spoken firm, steady, with no hidden tone of ownership. She remembered how he didn't touch her unless she needed support, how he kept his distance, how he gave her choices instead of commands. Still, fear is louder than facts when a woman has been vulnerable too long. The next morning, Alina woke to the smell of coffee and the muffled sounds of ranch hands starting their day. She opened the cabin door cautiously. A young cowboy named Finn stood nearby, holding a basket of food, bread, eggs, a jar of milk, and even an apple. He smiled awkwardly. "Boss said you might need breakfast till you get your strength back." Alina took the basket slowly, almost suspiciously, and murmured her thanks. Finn scratched the back of his neck. We're real glad the little ones are okay. They looked mighty tired yesterday." His sincerity felt disarming. Alina watched him walk away, her mind conflicted. Everyone here seemed polite, respectful. too respectful. It made her unsure whether to trust it or brace for something to go wrong. After making breakfast for her children, Alina stepped outside to explore the ranch grounds. She needed to learn where everything was: water, the kitchen, the workers' quarters. She walked carefully, trying not to draw too much attention. But the ranch hands noticed her anyway, not with judgment, with a kind of gentle curiosity. Some tipped their hats, some greeted her quietly. One older hand even nodded to her children with a soft smile. Alina wasn't used to such treatment. It made her tense, unsure. When she finally reached the main house, she found Caleb already working, sorting tools, giving orders, checking a wagon axle. His presence was solid, grounded, unshakable. When he noticed her standing awkwardly by the steps, he walked over. "Do you get any rest?" he asked. His tone was neutral, not warm, but not cold either. Controlled, predictable, safe. In a strange way, Alina nodded. "Yes, thank you." He studied her for a moment, not in the way men usually assessed women, but as someone evaluating whether she was strong enough to stand. Then he pointed toward the kitchen building. "When you're ready to work," he said, "that's where you'll be. But not today. Eat, rest, regain your strength." Alina didn't know whether to be relieved or unsettled. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Caleb said, already turning back to his tasks. "You're under my responsibility now." "That's enough." His words echoed in her chest. Responsibility, not demand, not threat. For the first time in months, maybe years, Lena felt something she barely recognized. Safety. But the fear inside her wasn't ready to die yet. That would take time, and without realizing it, Caleb Ward had just given her the one thing no one else had ever offered. Freely. A place to heal. The days that followed settled into a rhythm unfamiliar at first, then slowly comforting. Alina woke before sunrise, as she always had, but now it was to the smell of warm air drifting from the ranch kitchen instead of the cold emptiness of her old shack. Her children rose with more energy each morning, their cheeks filling out little by little, their eyes no longer sunk with hunger. Watching them eat without fear was enough to melt something heavy inside her every day. Still, the adjustment was far from easy. The first week her body fought exhaustion like a stubborn enemy. Months of starvation had left her weak, dizzy, and painfully slow. When she walked to the kitchen cabin for the first time to begin learning her duties, she swayed slightly. One of the ranch hands, Walt, an older cowboy with gray in his beard, stepped forward as if to catch her, but she straightened herself before he could. "I'm fine," she insisted. "You're not," Walt replied gently. "But you will be." The kitchen was larger than any cooking space she'd ever worked in. Iron pots hung on the walls, sacks of flour and beans lined the shelves, and a giant hearth sat at the center of it all. The head cook, Mrs. Marla Higgins, a stout woman with a commanding voice and warm smile, clapped Alina on the shoulders the moment she entered. "So you're the young lady we're lucking into," Marla said. "Good heaven knows, I need an extra set of hands." Alina blinked. Lucking into? She wasn't used to being considered a blessing. Marla quickly put her to work, chopping vegetables, washing dishes, and learning the rhythm of feeding a ranch with more than a dozen hungry cowboys. At first, Alina struggled. Her hands trembled, her cuts were uneven, and she grew breathless from the simplest tasks. Marla never scolded her, only nudged her back to the stool to rest. "You're healing," the older woman told her. "Healing don't happen in a day." Despite her weakness, Alina's pride pushed her to keep trying. She wanted to prove she wasn't useless. She wanted Caleb to see that she could repay what he had given her, but the ranch hands already seemed to accept her presence in ways she didn't expect. One morning, she dropped a pot by accident, the loud clang echoing across the courtyard. She jumped back, terrified of anger or punishment, told memories from her marriage surfacing. But instead of shouting, the cowboys simply turned, shrugged, and one called out, "Don't worry, ma'am, we all drop worse before noon." Another day, when she was carrying a heavy bucket of water, Finn rushed forward, offering to take it. She tried to refuse, but he simply grinned and said, "Boss would have my hide if I let you fall." Alina didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the unexpected kindness. Her children, meanwhile, flourished. Mateo helped in the stables, brushing horses and learning to mend tack. He quickly earned the cowboys' admiration with his quiet determination. Rosa and Alma spent their mornings with the ranch hens, or picking flowers near the stream that crossed the property. Their giggles, rare before became regular sounds, drifting through the ranch yard. Every evening, Alina tucked her children into clean beds, listening to their soft breathing. Sometimes she cried silently with relief. She had feared losing them. Now she feared waking up to find this life a dream. She often saw Caleb from a distance working, checking fences, riding his horse across the far fields. He rarely approached her, giving her space, yet somehow, she always sensed his presence. He watched her progress quietly, as if making sure she was safe but never intruding. His restraint confused her, and steadied her. He had saved them, yes, but he had not claimed them, not once. Day by day, Alina grew stronger. The hollows in her cheeks softened, her hands steadied, her steps regained confidence. A fragile but undeniable truth formed in her heart. She was no longer just surviving. She was beginning slowly, painfully, beautifully to live again. Caleb Ward had always been a man who kept his distance from others. Distance was safe. Distance meant he didn't owe anyone anything, not explanations, not feelings, not pieces of himself he wasn't ready to give again. But ever since Alina and her children had arrived, distance had become harder to maintain. At first he told himself he was simply making sure she didn't tea-faint in his kitchen, or that her children didn't tea-wander into dangerous parts of the ranch. That was all. He was responsible for them now. It was only natural he'd keep an eye on them. But the truth was deeper and far quieter. He noticed how Alina held her knife too tightly while she cooked, as if expecting someone to snatch it away. He noticed how she jumped slightly when a loud noise echoed across the yard. He noticed how she stared at food with a mix of hunger and disbeliefs, till not used to the idea that it was truly hers. He noticed how fiercely she protected her children, even when they were perfectly safe. He noticed everything, and watching her stirred something he hadn't felt in years. Concern mixed with reluctant admiration. Caleb didn't approach her often. When he did, his words were short, steady, careful. He didn't want to overwhelm her. Alina was like a skittish colt, frightened, tender, and recovering from too many blows. One wrong move, and he feared she would pull away, retreating into herself again. But from afar, he saw her changing. She walked straighter now. She laughed softly with Marla in the kitchen. She scolded her daughters with warmth instead of desperation. She ate without guilt. She cried less at night, he could tell, because the lantern in her cabin stayed lit for shorter hours. The ranch hands noticed too. Miss Elena's getting stronger, Walt told Caleb one morning while they checked the fencing. Looked like the wind could no longer blow her over. Caleb said nothing, but the corner of his mouth twitched faintly. He saw it. He saw all of it. Sometimes, especially in the evenings, he would pause near the long field path and watch her children chase each other in the grass. Their giggles floated through the airlight, unburdened. Alina would stand nearby, a tired but genuine smile softening her face. Caleb felt something in him crack open each time he saw that smile. She wasn't the ghost of a woman who'd arrived begging at his feet. She was returning to life, piece by piece. One evening at dusk, Caleb found himself standing near the cabin path just as Alina was stepping outside with a basket of scraps for the hens. They nearly collided. She gasped, stepping back quickly, instinctively keeping a respectful distance. I'm sorry, Mr. Ward, she stammered. He shook his head. No need. Her breathing was uneven, and her hands trembled just slightly. Caleb could tell she was still intimidated by him, not out of fear for her safety but simply because of who he was. The ranch owner, the man who had saved her family, the man whose intentions she couldn't yet read. He didn't try to ease her discomfort with words. He wasn't good with them. Instead, he gestured to the basket. I'll take that, he said. She hesitated. I can manage, I know. His voice softened. But you should be resting. Alina blinked at him, surprised by the gentle tone. For a second, something unspoken flickered between them, something cautious, fragile, but undeniably real. Caleb took the basket and walked away without another word, because staying longer felt dangerous. Not to her, to him. That night, Caleb lay awake in his own quiet room, staring at the ceiling. He had promised himself years ago that he would feel nothing for anyone, again that he would keep his heart locked in the grave with his wife and son. But hearts, he was learning, didn't always obey. And though he refused to say it aloud, even to himself, Caleb Ward cared for Alina, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because her quiet strength was stitching something inside him back together, something he thought was dead. For several days, peace settled over the Holt Ranch like a soft blanket. The widow, Mara, worked in the kitchen and garden. Her children explored the yard with timid but growing confidence. Calder Holt, the rancher, kept a watchful eye, not intrusive, not demanding, but quietly protective. For the first time in months, Mara felt the sharp edges of her fear dulling just slightly. But in the west, peace rarely stayed long. It happened late in the afternoon, when the sky shifted from bright gold to smoky orange. The breeze carried the smell of distant rain, and the cattle lowed restlessly as if sensing something in the air. Mara was gathering eggs in a basket, while her children played hopscotch drawn in the dirt with chalk Calder had given them. A shadow fell across the yard. At first she thought it was just a passing cloud, but then she heard the heavy stomp of boots and the harsh snort of a horse. Mara froze, fingers tightening around the fragile eggs. Her children looked up, their smiles fading. A man rode toward the ranch house, tall, wiry, with a black coat flapping behind him like wings of a vulture. His horse was a dark, nervous animal, stamping its hooves as if irritated by its rider. The man dismounted with a grunt and strode toward Mara with the confidence of someone who believed he owned everything he saw. Afternoon, widow, he drawled. Mara's stomach tightened. She knew that voice, knew that face, that cruel smirk, that cold glint in his eyes. Jed Sloan, her dead husband's debtor. The man who promised to collect his dues any way he pleased. The man whose threats had followed her like wolves ever since her husband passed. She stepped back, shielding her children behind her skirts. You need to leave, Jed, he chuckled, slow and dark. Last I checked, you owe me. I've been patient. but patience has its limits. And you disappeared from your cabin. Not polite of you. My husband owed you. Not me, she whispered, voice trembling. Ah, Sloane said, clicking his tongue. But deaths follow the living. His eyes drifted to her children. Unless you've got something else to offer. Before Mara could move, Sloane stepped closer. Too close, her children whimpered, clutching her legs. Don't touch them, she snapped, fear giving her voice strength. Sloane smirked. Relax, I ain't here to take him, I'm here to take you. Mara's breath locked in her chest. No, oh yes, he said, reaching for her wrist. He never touched her. A firm hand clamped around Sloane's coat collar and yanked him backward so hard he stumbled. Mara gasped. Calder Holt stood there silent, unshaken, his jaw set like stone. He didn't shout, he didn't make a scene. He simply stepped between Mara and the threat, his presence a wall no one could move. You're trespassing, Calder said. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. Take your horse and go. Sloane straightened his coat and let out a mocking laugh. This your new charity case, Holt, taking in strays now. Calder didn't rise to it, his eyes didn't blink. Last warning, Sloane's smirk faltered just slightly. Something in Calder's stance quiet, unthreatened, ready made him hesitate. Sloane spat toward the dirt near Calder's boots. This ain't over, he growled. Calder stepped forward once, just once. Sloane flinched, then he mounted his horse and galloped off, dust rising behind him. Silence settled. Mara's knees buckled, and she nearly dropped the basket. Calder turned to her slowly, gentler now. You all right? She nodded, breath shaky. I didn't think anyone would help us. Not like that. Calder looked at her children, trembling but unharmed. Long as you're here, he said softly, no one touches you. Not ever. For the first time in a long time, Mara believed it. The cabin was quieter than it had been in weeks. After the rancher Calder Holt brought medicine, food, and warmth to the starving family, the children finally slept with full bellies. The fire crackled in the hearth, washing the small room in gentle amber light. Outside, the wind beat against the thin wooden walls, but for once, the family inside was safe from it. Mara sat at the edge of her bed, fingers twisting the hem of her worn skirt. The rancher stood near the door, hat in hand, tall and quiet, watching her with a respectful stillness. He never took a step closer unless she invited it, but even at a distance his presence filled the room. You'll need more than one night's food to get through the winter, Calder said, voice low. Woodpile's almost gone. Roof's leaking. Boys are sick. And you're barely standing yourself. Mara swallowed hard, throat tight from exhaustion and shame. I know, she whispered, but I don't know what else to give. I told you, I have no money. No land worth anything. No livestock left. You already offered me what matters most, he said quietly. Her eyes snapped up. She'd forgotten the desperate words she'd spoken earlier at dusk-take. My children words torn from a mother at the edge of despair. Her voice shook. I didn't mean I would die before giving them away. I only said it because I didn't think we had any other chance. Calder stepped forward one careful pace, enough that the firelight caught the rough stubble on his jaw and the softened look in his eyes. I know you didn't mean it, he said, but I need you to understand something. I'm not here to take your children away. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I'm here to take all of you away. Together. Mara stared at him, breath caught somewhere between fear and hope. Mr. Holt, Calder, he corrected gently. Calder, what are you saying? He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his thoughts in 4 hours, and finally decided to release them. I wasn't lying earlier. My ranch, it's too big for one man, too quiet, too empty. I've got more rooms than I can count, but they're all cold. I come home every night to nothing but silence. And I can't help noticing how your children look at you, how they look at me. They need someone strong. You need a place where the wind can't reach you. And he stopped, shaking his head as if searching for the right words. I need a reason to come home at night. Mara felt her heartbeat thudding against her ribs. She had been abandoned before by her husband's illness, by neighbors who stopped visiting, by a world that didn't care about widows with hungry children. Trust was something she didn't have much of left. You're offering charity, she whispered. No, he said, voice firm but warm. I'm offering a home. Her throat burned. Tears welled, but she forced them down. Why us? Because when I look at you, he said softly, I don't see a burden. I see a family worth protecting. And when your little girl grabbed my coat today and wouldn't let go, he smiled faintly. Well, I figured maybe I'd been waiting on all of you. Silence fell, thick with emotion. Mara looked at her sleeping children, soft breaths, warm faces, finally peaceful. She remembered their cries from hunger, the cold nights, the terror of not knowing if they'd survive another week. And then she looked at Calder steady, sure, offering not pity but something far deeper. Let me take you home, he said gently. All of you. Mara's breath trembled. For the first time in months, hope didn't feel like a dangerous thing. Morning came quietly, as if the world itself sensed the fragile hope resting inside the old cabin. Purple dawn stretched across the sky, and a pale winter sun pushed through the frost-thin clouds. Mara woke to the crackle of a fire already burning, the smell of porridge warming in a pot, and the sound of her children stirring beneath thick blankets. For a moment, she forgot the night before, forgot Calder Holt's offer, forgot her tears, forgot her fear, and simply listened. No coughing fits, no whimpers of hunger, no wind blowing straight through the walls. When she sat up, she saw Calder kneeling by the hearth, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon, far too small for his big calloused hands. "You're awake," he said without turning, voice gentle. "Good. Thought I'd let you sleep. You haven't rested properly in months." Mara blinked hard, unused to such kindness. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and glanced at her children, and Ben and Clara huddled together, warmer than they had been in weeks. Clara held her oldest brother's arm like a doll, and Aiden kept one protective hand on her back even while sleeping. Calder finally looked up at Mara, and the hint of a smile reached his eyes. "Breakfast's almost ready. After that, we should pack." The words settled in the air like snowflakes, light but unmistakable. Pack, move, leave the cabin that had become a graveyard of hope and fear. Mara's pulse quickened. "You still mean what you said?" she whispered. Calder stood, slow and steady. "I don't make offers I don't intend to keep," he answered simply. "My wagon's outside. I brought room for everything you own and room enough for all of you." She looked around the small room. Everything she owned fit in one trunk and a few sacks. She had nothing of value. Nothing except her children. "Are you sure?" she asked. "A family of four it's a big responsibility." Calder stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "Mara," he said softly, "I'm not talking on a burden. I'm welcoming a family." Her eyes stung, but no tears fell. She was past tears now. She stood straighter, feeling strength where fear had lived for too long. "All right," she whispered. "We'll go with you." The rancher nodded once, the seriousness of the moment settling into his shoulders, but his eyes warmed with quiet relief. "Then let's get you home." The packing took less than an hour. A few threadbare clothes, a quilt her mother had sewn, a wooden toy horse Aiden carved for Clara, a handful of her late husband's tools, tokens of a life that had been filled with suffering but also love. Calder carried most of it himself, loading it carefully into the wagon. Mara tucked blankets around her children, making sure their cheeks stayed warm in the biting morning air. The wagon wheels creaked as Calder climbed into the driver's seat and offered his hand down to her. She hesitated only for a heartbeat before placing her palm in his. His grip was steady, not demanding, not possessive, but reassuring in a way she had never known. She settled beside him, children curled safely in the back, and the rancher snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, leaving behind the lonely cabin, the empty woods, and the months of hunger and fear. As they rolled across the snowy prairie, the sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the horizon. Mara looked at Calder. Calder looked ahead at the road, but the corner of his mouth lifted, just enough for her to see he was glad she was there. The journey toward their new life had begun.